Hi, I'm Paul Harris, inventor of the Theraphi, and we're here today with Dr. Glen Rein and Masati, and you guys are good friends, and maybe introduce each other.
So I am a scientist. Paul is a scientist. I'm on the biology side. Paul's on the engineering side. And Masati is gifted with the ability to kind of tune in and channel specific information that's relevant to the conversation. So we invited Masati to join us in our discussion about the role of consciousness and in the healing process during the treatments with the Therapy.
Thank you. Yeah, so name is Masati, founder of Xponential Intelligence Metascience. And it's a science of, consciousness. It's basically how frequencies affect this reality and help you understand what to take advantage of the frequencies so you can have a fantastic life. It's really that simple.
Nice. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, well, frequencies is the underlying basis. I like to say the entire cosmos is made up of waves upon waves upon waves, and it's very complex, and there's infinite spectrum. What we see and know is just we can rely on our five senses, and we have a very limited, narrow bandwidth. We hear in certain frequencies, we see in certain frequencies, but all those bandwidths are just very narrow in the huge spectrum of the actual frequencies that are capable out there. And I like to think that it kind of goes infinitely in either direction. And we work with plasma quite a bit, and actually using the plasma as a fractal antenna. And then we embed frequencies on top of carrier waves that go into the plasma. And we found some really amazing beneficial results in being able to modulate physical, emotional, mental, and even spiritual type aspects to it. We've had a lot of people with the Therapy have amazing results with all those areas. So.
And because the fractal nature and of the antenna involved, DNA itself is also a fractal antenna, so this kind of energy resonates with the DNA molecule. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that in the past, but now we wanted to kind of expand the conversation to include how these kind of energies will affect consciousness and help raise our consciousness, because that's obviously very much of interest to this community. And Masati happens to be an expert in that very subject.
Yeah, I've been known as a consciousness authority, so thanks for that. But so these two great gentlemen, just to boil it down for everybody who isn't a scientist,
yeah, exactly.
Basically what they're saying is that there's congruency or frequencies at all levels, even beyond our five senses, and that's the field that I get into. This is where your intuition comes in. This is where knowing comes in. This is where people channel things of that nature. So that consciousness that's out there, that knowledge that's out there, renders us or creates us. We only experience it through our five senses. So what he was talking about literally is like what this Therapy bed does is literally starts to help you resonate or harmonize, not just say physical or biological or cellular frequencies, but at a higher frequency of who you actually are. And this is where I think if I'm not mistaken, some people go, gosh, you know what, I connected to source, or I feel euphoric and so on like that.
Right.
Because there's a resonance or a harmonious, say, frequency band that just goes back and forth. I see how your bed works, so if you don't mind, just tell
sure.
me. So so the two, gosh, what do they call it?
Tubes.
The plasma tubes that come in. So they're in their natural state. Right? It's just preset, kind of like a crystal, right? Pure crystal is a natural state. You touch it, and it takes you because we all want to go into harmony or balance. So when you go into nature, it creates harmony and balance for you, and that's why you feel good. You start to release. So the Therapy bed, literally from what I'm seeing, is like it puts you into that harmonic state of, say, resonance, where you can feel, say, vulnerable enough to let go of the deep-seated memories that are in your cellular identities that you don't even know about. Stuff that you got from your parents, the genetics. I just did a talk on this, actually, on your generation that you came into. All those things are creating you, and we don't even know about it. So in this conversation, it's really exciting to see that there is, say, something mechanical, but that mechanical is waves. So it's almost like the deepest core level of who you are, because we're all frequencies. That wave starts to align your physical body, and hence, as you become in tune with the nature frequencies, you start to release all the deep-seated patterns and even maybe disease or issues or emotional issues.
And it's probably worth mentioning that these frequencies are not ordinary frequencies, because there's a lot of devices out there that talk about frequencies and use frequencies, but we're really talking about quantum frequencies. And the beauty of that is that the consciousness of the individual is very can be described by quantum physics. Mm-hmm. So if our consciousness is quantum in nature, and the frequencies in our mind, in our consciousness, are quantum in nature, and the frequencies of the plasma are quantum in nature. That's why the three can resonate with each other. And maybe, Paul, you could talk a little bit about the quantum nature of the plasma in this context.
Right. Yeah, well, that's the thing about being fractal, and the reason why we call it a fractal antenna is because when the plasma is formed within the tubes, and in the early days we used to use, in going into the waveforms, we used to use square waves and pulses, and we were targeting viruses and bacteria and things like that, and those were destructive frequencies. So when I created the Theraphi, I thought, enough of this destruction and going against things. I wanted to do something that was more in harmony with nature. So basically everything in the Theraphi is based on natural frequencies that are based from nature, and the idea was to create coherent waveforms that are in harmony with nature. And the fractality in the plasma, so in those early days when we were saying, we're hitting viruses and bacteria, it's like, well, how does that work? Because the wavelengths of the frequencies that we're using, some of them can be up to a mile long, and as you get higher in frequency, they get shorter and shorter down to millimeter waves. But to go down all the way to the scale of a DNA, it was like, well, how is this happening? And I began to realize that inside of the plasma itself, the reason why it's fractal is because you have the large volume of the actual plasma, and you could calculate the resonant frequency of the tube itself. But because it's an atomic and a quantum level that's going on, where electrons are jumping off the shells of the atoms, and every time they jump back on, they're releasing a photon. Well, now we're talking about subatomic particles all the way down to that level. So that's how the fractality of it actually works.
It's the same. The science behind that statement is interesting, because it's the same mathematics based on quantum mechanics, which is used to describe both what Paul just talked about and consciousness itself.
Right.
And that's why the two can resonate and information can be exchanged.
Mm.
It's really interesting. You're talking about fractal. The universe is fractals. Mm-hmm. It's created of a fractal universe. So if you can figure out, say, a fractal or a piece of your life, or in this case, healing, you can figure out other layers as well. So when he was talking about, fractal antenna, the way I was seeing it, and this is my work as well, it's like if you can fix somebody at this fractal of who they are, it resonates on both sides.
Right.
And then when that resonance occurs harmoniously, it resonates the next fractal and the next fractal and the next fractal, and it just keeps expanding out on both realities.
Right.
Make sense for you?
Yeah, it does, because it's recursive, right?
Exactly.
They're repeating patterns. So you zoom into a fractal when you see a Mandelbrot or whatever,
Exactly.
The patterns repeat, and that's the meaning of recursive.
Yeah, and then it expands out, and then it flows back in. Expands out and it flows back in, and this cycle or cyclical nature, this is where you start to harmonize, or this is where you start to heal. Just one more thing you brought up on you getting rid of the square waves,
right,
or like crushing viruses.
Right.
When people heal, or when societies heal, or when societies create medicines and all that, they literally think that it's we need a destructive force to destroy things, and it's really not true. And I think what you're getting into is like, wait a second, let's do it the way nature does.
Right.
Nature doesn't like, create an antivirus or all those things. Nature goes, wait a second, we're at this level, there's a virus that's attacking us, let's improve ourselves so this virus doesn't attack us, and then the virus gets destroyed that way.
Right.
Which is very, very different. So we improve ourselves, and that's what this Theraphi does. It improves who you are, hence you can release the viruses, diseases, whatever that's out there, emotional stress. Most people, again, or most societies, it's like, I've got this problem, I'm going to stay the same, and then I'm going to attack the problem. And, well, you're going to die that way. Nature doesn't work that way. You have to strengthen your immune system or your frequency system. You really have to strengthen that. So, nice job.
Yeah, thanks. It reminds me of the argument between Louis Pasteur and Beauchamp when they're, and Pasteur was like, no, we have to target these microbes and kill these things. And Beauchamp said, no, it's the terrain. It's the terrain. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's worth mentioning that we have the ability to control that terrain.
Right.
That our mind is capable of actually modulating the physicality of it, but also the energies involved, and that's more in line with my work, because I'm very interested in how the energies in the mind, the energies of consciousness, can actually bring about these physical changes in both the energy fields in the brain and the mind and the molecules to bring about these changes that you guys are talking about. But the Theraphi will facilitate that.
Yeah. And I think we have to go beyond the mind, because
Right.
most of your diseases that most people have is because of genetic patterns.
Right.
So in your case, or how people think, it's like, well, if I control my mind, then I can control everything, and then people fail at that. But if you become an observer of the mind, if you become an observer of the mind, and then you start to see the patterns and how you think, it's called what I call referencing, spatial referencing. You start to reference how you render yourself through your mind, your state of mind, how you think, what your thoughts are, and so on like that. And then as you start to, say, understand how your mind thinks, you start to, say, master, and I think that's what you're talking about, Glenn.
Right.
This is where you start to master your thoughts, master who you are. Mm-hmm. And it becomes an amazing concept, because the construct of the mind is so powerful. It can create delusions like you wouldn't believe.
Right.
And our lives, unfortunately, are a delusion, right?
Yeah.
The illnesses and all those things, those aren't real, guys. But it's a construct of the mind that we've created ourselves in. So we start to become aware of the patterns on how you, create your delusions of life, and then it allows you to separate. The Theraphi, when it harmonizes you with nature, it allows you to step out of the mind even deeper. Right. Exactly. And then you start to go, oh, that's why my life is the way it is.
Right. And that's an alchemical process. Yeah. For me, I've taught classes and studied alchemy and practical alchemy over the years, and the alchemist said that everything is conscious. I'd like to hear your guys' take on consciousness. There's a big argument, are dogs conscious or animals conscious, but is it just people? Because there's a scientific sort of belief for a long time that, we're the only things that are conscious in the universe, but the alchemists believe that consciousness is part of everything, and everything has
And the same thing with the Hinduism and the Eastern traditions. They define consciousness as this kind of energy which is present in all matter, whether it's organic or inorganic.
Yes.
And of course, the really interesting thing is to what extent can we modulate those processes? And Masati raised a great point that the mind can play tricks on us. I actually read an article, a scientific article, where they talked about that, and I thought, mind plays tricks on us, and like, wow, I'm processing that whole thing. Can you elaborate on that?
We can. I can expand into the consciousness, because through the years I've worked like over 15 years on what I've done after my near-death experiences. So I actually saw consciousness from a very different perspective.
All right.
You know, I saw it outside of, say, the
Right.
space and time construct. So from my understanding, again, 15 years and probably about over 100,000 client sessions, that's a lot of practice to understand that. Consciousness does exist in all aspects of self, and if you can think about consciousness as a program, so say even a grain of sand has to be conscious, otherwise it would just disappear into infinite space. So there's a certain level of consciousness that is created for you to render yourself. So a grain of sand has a level of consciousness to create itself as a grain of sand. So what that means is, like, in no time, no space, all possibilities can happen. So that moment of time of a grain of sand goes, I am not anything else except a grain of sand. It has to be that conscious to query out everything that it's not. So at that level, we all have, say, levels of consciousness. Humans have, say, the highest bandwidth of consciousness, or the ability to introspect, to reflect. It's like, wait a second, how and why I am creating myself. So that's the way I see consciousness. And consciousness is not an internal dialogue.
Right.
It actually is part of the fabric.
The field.
Yeah, it's part of the field. And it actually renders who you are. Most people think you're conscious and you're creating yourself. No, this goes into the multiverse.
Right.
Where it's like, in this area of consciousness that I'm creating myself, this is like sacrifice and control and all that. So you become sacrificial and controlling, or being controlled. In this area of consciousness, you start to reflect, like, well, brilliance, healing, whatever. So whatever consciousness that you render or you create yourself, that's the choice of free will, by the way, is where you're rendering your space, or who you are in physical form. So the consciousness, to me, is more of an operating system. It dictates on how you render your programs in this reality.
So if we extend that argument and say, well, if everything is conscious, the Theraphi is conscious.
Yeah.
And particularly at the 0 point where the two fields meet, because that will bring in the quantum level.
Yes.
So, that is yet another explanation about how the Theraphi works.
Totally. Well, that's just it. You bring up a great point, because the Theraphi works on scalar waves.
Right.
Take it in plasma.
Yeah.
So scalar waves in plasma, that has a consciousness outside of human connection. So humans at those deeper levels cannot control or distort, like the observer effect. It cannot. It kind of can, but it holds on to its truth.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when it holds on to its truth, just like nature does, you walk into nature, you see you see the distortions compared to the purity of nature. So this happens in quantum computers. I worked on quantum computers to create coherence, over 300% coherence, because it's an electron field, and it's affected by the scientists, how they programmed it, solar flares and all that. So what I do is, like, literally create a space around the quantum computer, frequency-wise, and go, hey, you're an electron. Do what electrons do best.
Oh, neat.
And then you start creating coherence. So in your bed, your bed is basically telling your physical body, the cells and the atoms and the photons, everything that creates. It's like, hey guys, we're photons.
Yeah.
This reminds me of pets nowadays are dumpsters for people. This is where you see the dog, and it just looks like the person, because they're dumping their heart issues, their diseases, and all that stuff. The dog just wants to be a dog,
Right.
And and that's what we do to our bodies. So this bed literally helps you go, God, you know what? I'm just a cell. I don't need all this human stuff. I just want to be a cell. And this is where you regenerate yourself anew.
Yeah, I like to call it a consciously assisted technology.
It is.
And going back to the plasma, I think just like our thoughts, our memories, we can explain a lot now with our latest understanding of plasma. And I see it all, including consciousness, is actually a plasma field. And plasma has this unique way, the real the word comes from Greek, and it means to be able to conform to shape. And so,
Yes, exactly.
so the coherence, the more you can cohere and keep your fields in coherence, the more of access to it, and the more of a connection to source and to everything around you.
Yeah, so that plasma field that you talk about, that's that layer of consciousness or the realities that you create yourself in. So if you're like a piece of clay, you get molded by the consciousness or the dimensions of time and space that you render yourself in.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
So if you become aware of how you are like getting molded, you start to go, wait a second, this stuff isn't me, this disease isn't me, this disease. Because the consciousness, if you're carrying like propensities of disease, that consciousness will mold you into, say, that disease or distortion or mental breakdown or whatever.
Right.
So you start to go, shit, I don't need that.
Yeah.
You clean that out, and then when it starts to mold you, it starts to mold you in a pure version of yourself. And then you go, gosh, I feel godlike. Whoa, this is me.
Right. Yeah, it's like that self-fulfilling prophecy in how subjective you are to what other people would say to you. You go to a doctor and, he says, oh no, you only have 3 weeks left to go. How many people actually die within that 3-week period who probably wouldn't have if they weren't imprinted into their field, right?
So true.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Masati just said, in between the lines there, was that he can actually increase the coherence of a quantum computer.
Yes.
So we are a quantum computer. Our brain is a quantum computer, and although Masati is able to do that with his consciousness, most people have a little difficult time doing that. So that's why they need to use tools to help facilitate that process, and the Theraphi is one of those tools.
Yeah, well, even if I've changed, lives beyond, I guess beyond magical, is what they say. But, I changed the frequency, but then physically, emotionally, you have to change your habits, ideas, your biology, and so on. And so, again, I can help people resonate at a certain frequency. I would call it your blueprint of who you are. But then you would need tools like, the Theraphi or, other tools and methodologies to help you, they perpetuate, say, the biological system that you are.
Right.
So it's a mixture of both, which is really cool.
Yeah, and the fact that he's saying that we can change our frequency, I can confirm that in my research in the lab with DNA. I've been able to actually measure the frequencies of DNA, the intrinsic frequencies that the molecule vibrates at. And when healers who have the ability to raise their own consciousness can affect the DNA and actually create new frequencies that were not there before, as well as increase the ones that are there. So this is the same phenomena that Masati is describing, but in the lab.
Yeah.
And you've tested us in that Faraday cage, remember?
And I did that some of those experiments with Masati himself, right?
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I like your reference to the tools because we exist in this physical domain, and to start out, we sort of need these tools in life to help us understand how these things interact. But what you've been able to do is take it beyond a physical tool, and this is an important part, is that we are all, light beings and electrical beings, and we have an infinite potential.
Yes.
And I like to see the tools as just evolving the consciousness. So we will use this material plane to help evolve our consciousness till we get to the point where you've been able to do. You just do everything from the frequency mind and frequency.
Again, like I said, we still need the. I really like what you said. It really goes back into, so what does it mean by evolving consciousness?
Good question.
I went to Starbucks, and I bought a bottle of water. It was called Ethos water.
Right.
And it's like, gosh, for every bottle, we're going to donate 5 cents. We're going to plant a tree, or we're going to go help people. We're going to go save the whales and all that stuff. But that stuff doesn't work, guys. I mean, it's really nice to do that, but we've tried to do it so many times, hundreds of thousands of years. If you've ever noticed, and think of this, anything that's been benevolent has always turned into a destructive force. Why is that? if you think of anything that you've done, even love, for example, nowadays even food has turned into a destructive force.
Yeah, it's been
It's crazy,
weaponized
right?
kind of thing.
How do you do that? Now even the air, the water. Why is that? Because our consciousness, or the layer of of how we render ourselves here, is in a consciousness that is always about control, lack, and sacrifice. We need to get out of that pattern. You changed your ways of like bombarding the virus. It's like, no, we got to evolve to a higher level, and that stuff falls away. Same thing with consciousness. People go, I'm going to stay the same, and then I'm going to expand and be nice and all that. Guys, it's all about frequencies. What you want to do is like nature is like, okay, what's holding me back from being a pure enlightened beings? Like you said, we're all enlightened beings. We started that way in the beginning, but then we have all this trash that our ancestors just like dumped on us because we weren't conscious enough to go, shit, we don't need that in the next generation. Right. Nature does it all the time. Like from generation to generation, it basically tells you, the program dictates, it's like what we did right, what we did wrong. Okay, this next version is going to even be better.
Right.
In humans, because of free will, it's like, I'll just have what grandfathers have. It's like, what?
Yeah.
That's how we evolve consciousness, is let go of the past, live in the moment, and then you get to expand into your beautiful self.
That's a big part of it. Like erasing, like you got to clear the slate, and that's how nature does it. If you think to the fungi, I'm big into mushrooms and that, they're the primordial, primary digesters of everything on the planet. So when trees fall, they die and they fall over. Nature has a way of just, all right, let's clear the slate, digest all that stuff. That's what the fungi do. They move in, they dissolve it all back down to its smaller molecules, and they all get reused again. Exactly. And even our bodies, we're just other, molecules that were created in the past. And
exactly, and we just hold on to that stuff. It's like, gosh, it's I don't know, it's memorable. Yeah. I like it. Grandma was like this.
And if we think in terms of energies in this context, there are negative energies out there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, right. And because the Theraphi is capable of neutralizing and making coherent a virus, then it also does the same thing to negative energy. So it works directly on those negative energy spots in the brain and makes them more coherent, and then they dissolve, as Masati just described.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because the negative energies slow down, they're lethargic, and they stick, and they'll get stuck, and people say they can see auras. They're like, oh yeah, you have this clump on here. And in all ancient practices, qigong and these kind of things, it's all about moving that qi and getting that flow going and removing the blockages, clearing out the old patterns, and then leaving a new clean slate for the next patterns that you're going to take on.
And I think the Theraphi and your technologies, what I do is, you can say scrub something clean, but then if you have the crevices that say allows that dirt to hold on to, it's going to get messy again. So at a deeper level, and what I've seen from what I've done, and again, the Theraphi, what happens is, like, if your cell structure is all wrinkled and it's not the perfect origin of what the cell should be, and that's where deterioration, aging, and all the other stuff that we accumulate that creates disease, it's because the surface of the cells are wrinkled or distorted, and they hold on to particles that should be released.
Right, and Glenn, cellular memory. Then maybe
cellular memory.
Exactly. Can you explain what happens there?
Well, I'm still processing the word wrinkled as a biologist. I mean, what exactly does that mean?
It's all, when I see people's cell structure, it's like, it's not a beautiful shape. It's all like, it's like a prune.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Blood cells in live blood cell analysis, you can see.
That kind of wrinkle.
Or like EMFs,
Oh, yeah.
You have radiation, the cells just like get wrinkly and just distorted, or even Dr. Miller,
or dehydrated.
Dehydrated.
Yes, I was thinking
there
that.
We go.
Dehydrated, wrinkled.
Yeah, but as far as memory goes, I mean, I consider memory as an energy form, and that you have good memories and bad memories, like we were talking about energy being positive and negative, and it's the interplay between the two, and by the coherence in the Theraphi that allows the body to shift and decrease the negative and increase the positive.
When you start to get a healthy cell structure, this is where those memories start to say release because it can't hold on to you anymore.
Right.
Yeah. And
Right.
it's not.
They're not stuck in the crevices, like you say,
Exactly.
or the wrinkles.
Yeah, and the crevices and the wrinkles and something that you might want to talk about is that the distortions are literally frequency patterns that the cells shape themselves into to hold on to memories.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's like Hans Jenny and cymatics and sound, how it affects the shape and form.
Exactly.
Right. Right.
And then
You change the frequency, the shape, the forms, the pattern changes.
Exactly. So they're bringing in the frequencies again, right?
And these waves of consciousness that come through that render us here physically, it bounces off the distorted, the distortions of how we render ourselves, and then that's how we create life here. So if you're like a perfect vessel or the best vessel you can be, you're going to reflect off all the distortions that would get stuck on you. Yeah. And you only connect with the better, the cleaner, the healthier, frequencies that are available.
And of course, those distortions are what create disease and physical abnormalities but not only physical diseases, but psychological, emotional, and spiritual.
Spiritual crisis. Absolutely. You see people have as well. It's interesting how it works on all the levels. It's back to that fractality and in the recursion.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Well, that was a pretty good discussion of the nature of consciousness.
Yeah, excellent.
Good job, brother.
Thank you.
All right, good job.